Hello, and welcome to Event Sourcing and Reality, because I want to talk about how event sourcing and the concepts behind it have changed me as a person and how I interact with the whole world, not just software. It's, for instance, like this morning. I go downstairs, and there it is, a glass on the floor, on its side, water everywhere. All I see is the current state of the floor and the glass and the water. And if that's all I have, then what do? Well, I probably fall back to our usual default, which is blame a human. But I like to think, what if this glass were event sourced? Then it could tell me the story of how I got there, how it got there. For instance, it might say, I could say, why are you spilled? And it would be like, well, the floor pushed up on the bottom while gravity pulled down on the top of the glass, and that tipped it over. Okay, why did that happen? Well, a few seconds earlier, the glass was up here and gravity pulled it down. Before that, it was up here and gravity pulled it down. And then gravity pulled it down. And before that, of course, it was on the table where I left it the night before. So some force moved it off of the table and then let gravity do its work. I bet you can guess what that force was. This is Pixie. Our house is eventually consistent in the sense that if you leave a glass of water on the table, it eventually will be on its side ever since we got Pixie. Now if Pixie were event sourced, then I could find out a story of why she knocked the glass off the table in the first place. And I mean, she's a cat. There's plenty of randomness involved in their actions, I'm pretty sure. But that randomness occurred on a probability space of all the possible actions Pixie could have taken. For instance, instead of pushing the glass to the left onto the floor, Pixie could have pushed it to the right onto the couch. But of course, Pixie's probability space of action depends on her internal state, which may include prior experience with knocking the glass onto the couch and figuring out that she couldn't drink the water when it soaked into the couch. So maybe that was part of the consideration. It's even possible that there was some thought of her water bowl, which is just fine, but I doubt it. Really, I like to think that if Pixie could explain to me that probability landscape, it would have been shaped by her intention to serve a wider purpose, a purpose of a society bigger than just her, the purpose of the Intergalactic Cat Society for the Confirmation of Gravity. And that is why cats knock things over. They've got to continue to confirm gravity. This society also has some honorary members, which are small humans, ages 1 to 2 or so. But whenever something falls over in our house, we say, gravity, and celebrate its confirmation. This is what I love about event sourcing, even hypothetically, even when I use it in my head as well as my software. Event sourcing can always tell us why. This is why it's so important in finance, where we're constantly needing to justify, or at least hypothetically need to support the justification of all of the numbers that we produce, all of the decisions we make. In an event-sourced piece of software, you can have this completeness and consistency where cause and effect is fully documented. And that's really very satisfying. Event sourcing gives us an alternative to the traditional relational database, everything in its place and we update its place kind of philosophy that says everything in the universe is defined by its properties. For instance, this eraser here is defined by squareness, and it is currently square. And if I happen to squish it and roll it and make it into something relatively spherical, then its shape is now WOD, and we can update that in the database. And that is what defines this eraser now. But event sourcing gives us an alternative. It says, no, the thing is not defined by its properties. In fact, its properties are defined by a sum of past changes. Event sourcing puts change right up front as the basis for reality. For instance, we could draw a relational model of an order with some line items, and each line item has artifacts, or we could turn that sideways, look at it over the course of time, draw the lifetimes of these items, and fill in all the events that were interesting in its lifetime. And then from the order, we can go to the line items. The life cycles of the line items fit entirely within the order life cycles. That's how you can tell that they belong in the same aggregate. And then we can label all of these events. We get to put names to change, specific names to the forces in our world that change the properties of our data, of the things that we're modeling. And then once we have these names, of course, from that, we can construct their life cycles. And we can even turn it sideways and say, what is the current state of this order as of today, or as of some date in the past, as we choose? And that we can put on the whiteboard if we want to. So we get everything that the relational model has, but more, because we can always go deeper and we can tell the story of why it looks like this, how it got that way. We have more than state. We also get a story. Of course, event sourcing isn't perfect. There are ways that it's challenging. One of those is the expectations of that 50 years of entrenched relational databases where updates take place in place and all we care about is the present substance. Those expectations can be hard to meet. Expectations of people, for instance, it's tough in a UI when you don't have when you expect to see an immediate update. Eventual consistency doesn't meet the expectations of users. I mean, with Pixie, if when she pushed the glass off the table, it only eventually hit the floor, then she wouldn't be able to drink water from it and get that immediate gratification. So why bother? I don't think she would. So this is a challenge, but we have ways of overcoming this. There's been lots of talks at this conference about how we deal with the challenges that event sourcing presents us, especially in a software world that's not surrounded entirely by other event sourcing systems, because it's not the right solution for every problem. Another challenge is scale in multiple ways. So one way is scale in time, and that includes both over time we accumulate more and more events, and there's a volume of events, and in general, with everywhere, as soon as you create data, you need to have a policy for deleting it someday, or at least archiving it to S3 with everything else in the world that stays forever. But these are challenges that we totally can overcome individually, case by case, according to the meaning of what we're doing and how long that story is really relevant. A harder way to scale in time is that over time we want to change the software. That's really our job, to change the software and continually improve it. And changing the software takes place at a different pace than changing any data on disk. As soon as you write something to disk, you have like this anchor, okay? You have an anchor that's going to hold you back because the code can change a lot faster than all of that data on the disk. So either we need to carefully design migrations to bring all of this event data up to the new standards that the software has, or, and I like this alternative, we have to make our software backwards compatible with itself and able to read events in any version over time and convert those into the current form that we want to work with. At Strange Loop last week, Aditya Saram gave a really interesting talk about the NIM language, and the NIM language has built-in facilities for doing a diff on those types, the old one and the new one, and providing functions to convert between them. That was pretty cool. So scaling in time and over change is hard, but it's hard in every software, and we can solve these problems case by case. Another problem is scaling in scope, because our event sourcing system, our beautiful, complete, consistent system that can tell its story at all times, can only do so much. There's only such a size that we can have consistency in. To have consistency, we have to have and define a very careful subset of language that we all agree on meaning. This is not natural for language. Naturally, language evolves according to use, and as people need it to do new things, it magically does. We just use it that way and it starts meaning that. We have to be careful of that in our event source systems, in our bounded contexts, where we have a language that is consistent, both between our words that we talk to each other and in the code. That's what gives us a story that has meaning, the same meaning to all of us. But it's a challenge, and it does not scale beyond a team. To scale beyond the capabilities that a single team can support, we need multiple bounded contexts with conscious language translations between them. So for instance, if we have, like, here's a happy little event source system, and it listens for changes of the kind of state that it cares about, and it puts those into its internal state so that it can use it to respond to commands. And those responses change its internal state through more events. And also, these responses send commands and changes out for other systems or other components of the software system to listen to. Of course, in the real world, not everything is event sourced, so we probably have to do some queries out to an external system and also let other systems query our internal state. That's okay, we have a projection for that. All of these events are naturally persisted. That's the point. But we also need to be sure to persist. Anything that we receive from an external system, we need to record that because it's part of our decision-making process. Also, anything that we send out. I work for Honeycomb right now, and one of the features in our product that I think is really cool is that whenever a user does a query in Honeycomb over their data, that changes the URL at the top, and that URL is a link that they can share with other people. And it's a permalink, like super permalink. We only keep data around, it's observability data, so we keep it around for 60 days. But that link will always work because whenever we run that query, when we show it to the user, we also cache it in S3, the place where everything goes forever. And so we'll always be able to draw those graphs again for anyone they send that link to, even though the underlying data is gone. So to maintain this complete consistency, we need to persist everything that came in and everything that went out, even when it's not events. But then there's a larger question. We send these commands and events out. Where do they go? What do they do? I mean, maybe we know exactly where we send the command, maybe. But we certainly don't know who all subscribes to our state change events that they might want to know to. What effects do our actions have on the world? In an event-driven architecture, you get a beautiful decoupling where you don't have to care who receives those events and what they do with them. The important part is that you don't have to care when they receive the events and when they do that. But really, as a developer of this system, I want to know if I change the format of these events, who's going to be affected? And there's various ways of getting this. Some systems try to make the configuration such that you can predict who would get the event. I like to look at it from a different perspective of just tell me who got the event. And we can do that. We can totally find out where our events went and what effect they had if we use observability for that. If we emit events about our events and the other events, and we get some events for our events. Okay, so trace events, for instance, if our system, whenever it receives or sends out a command or an event, emits a trace event for that, then we can put that together in production based on what actually happened and get a picture of this. So if Pixie initiates, Pixie's an external force. We're not including her in our event sourcing system. So Pixie initiates a push glass to left. All right, what does that affect? Well, maybe the glass notices and does the move to the left in this imaginary world. In real life, we don't model reality. We only model abstractions. This is an abstraction of the glass, and that's what I'm modeling. So it moves to the left, and then it emits like its new position, and gravity reacts to that by pulling it down, say, but maybe also a person reacts and yells at Pixie. We can track all of these and see what happens and the total cascade of events that come from our events if we use observability. And I think this is really cool because observability is entirely event-based. So it meshes really well with event sourcing. These skinny lines, by the way, on the traces represent consequences that Pixie was done pushing the glass to the left at the width of that orange thing. But then the asynchronous portion of the trace extends out to the end of its consequences. This contrasts with metrics. Metrics are very much in-place updates. They are the old style. I decide what I want to count, and then I increment that number in place. And then you get a graph. But that's all you get. You get the graph. You can't get the story. Observability can give us the graphs and the story. I love it. This is why I work at Honeycomb. And my opinion about observability is influenced by event sourcing, because event sourcing helps me think about change. We start with the change in the data. That's what our events are. And we can move up to a higher level. How does that change happen? Well, it's in code somewhere. It's in code. And then we can think about, how does our code change? Because our job as developers, let's face it, it's not writing code, it's changing code. We almost never write code from nothing. We change code, and we picture those as a get commit graph. Some of those commits are more important than others because they got deployed. And when they got deployed, then they affect the software architecture, or this is our generic architecture diagram, but they affect the software system as a whole. And that software system is composed of running instances. And then some of those changes are more important than others, because at some point we turn on a feature flag or we release a change out into the wild and let users see it. And that is a change in the external external part of the system. And it is the appearances that matter, that define the system. Our interface defines us. And our job is to gradually change that, to offer more and more useful capabilities to either our customers or to the business. This is our job. Our job is not to build software, it's to change software. After the trivial prototype is done. And that focus on change fits all the way down in event sourcing. And I find that I'm better at my job when I think of my job as designing change. So as developers, this is what we do. We don't design software, we design change. We don't design some end state of the perfect architecture. Maybe we do. But what matters is whether we can get there from here. And can we get there from here without disrupting our users? Can we continue to read the old events and also support additional information and additional event types? Or do we design a migration? That's often the hard part. It's not like, where do we want to go? It's how do we get there? And I love what event sourcing does to my head, because it helps me focus on the change. And that helps me, in my life and the way I relate to the world, because let's face it, reality is change. Okay, our traditional common sense philosophy, ever since Aristotle, most of the philosophers, including Aristotle and sense, have been reality is substance. What is real is matter and its properties and its form and maybe its essence, or now we just care about the efficient force that it can exert on each other. There are a few exceptions like Heraclitus, but overall, Western philosophy focuses on the solidity, and we consider change an exception, and change is to be investigated because the substance is just obvious. But really, if you think about something that we think of as very stationary, like a rock, It's not that that rock doesn't change. It's not that that rock isn't a sum of every force that's been exerted on those molecules so far. It is. It's just that like the time span that we care about is so short that we might as well model it as a constant. Taking change as the basis of reality lets us construct substance. The essence of this eraser is not its current wad shape or its periodic square shape as I fiddle with it. You know what this thing is? It's a moldable eraser. It's all about the change. And we're like that too. Like as people, we're kind of an extreme of this, in fact, because as organisms, we're constantly recreating ourselves. We're always remanufacturing proteins to build whole new cells to replace the ones that die, and then we slough those off into the environment. We constantly have to take in food and oxygen from the environment so that we can constantly recreate ourselves. That's life. Life is constant recreation. It is constant change. We're never the same from moment to moment. And the only stillness is death. Okay, so it's less like I am a person. I am this person with these properties and this knowledge and this attitude. It's more like I'm constantly personing, constantly renewing myself, constantly discovering myself. So instead of thinking about myself as a person, event sourcing helps me realize that it's not so much I'm a person as I am this process. You know that I think it was Heraclitus actually had the thing about the man can't step in the same river twice because it's not the same river, it's not the same water molecules, and it's not the same man. And that's like one of the head scratchers of our culture. And it's a head scratcher because we have this weird idea that I am my molecules. Why would I be my molecules? I am the process of change from one set of molecules, from one body of knowledge, from one set of feelings and relationships to another. So in that sense, yes, it is the same person who steps in the river because they're a process. And it is the same river because a river isn't a set of molecules. A river is the flow. A fire, what is a fire? It's not molecules. It's a process. Those are like obvious examples where we can't make fire into a substance. We have to accept that, yes, some things are processes. And once we accept that I am a process, that helps me. For instance, I realize that if I want to be myself, I want to be all the Jessitron I can be, that doesn't mean continuing to be exactly who I am right now. It doesn't mean continuing to exhibit these properties and saying the same things and believing the same things. What makes me who I am is that process of change, is the continual learning, is the changing of beliefs from relational databases are the best to, wow, I really love event sourcing, to what's going to be next, or at least here's how I balance these things. I am that progression. We can do this with our teams. If you really love your team, if you think your team is great, realize that your team is a process. It is the continual change. And the way to keep being a great team is not to stay the same. It's not to hire more of the exact same people who have the same interests as the rest of you. It's to continually become a great team, continually recreate that greatness. Maybe hire someone who has skills that you didn't have before and learn even more and become a more interesting version of yourself. This is flexible. It also, event sourcing gives me a different picture of my actions because just as I can picture Pixie's actions as randomly chosen from a set of possibilities that don't make any sense to me, I can picture my actions as randomly chosen from a possibility space that's open to me. Not entirely random. There's a distribution there, and it's shaped by my intentions. So if you've ever wondered about the free will debate, I can answer for you here. No, we don't have complete control over our actions. Neither are we predetermined by our genes and the world around us. We influence our actions. We influence our actions through our consciously and unconsciously chosen intentions. That shapes the probability space. When I use my will to do something, I can influence it. But you know what? It's not perfect either. I don't perfectly control my actions all the time through my intentions. However, I can influence them in a lot of ways. Because what I do at any given moment is also determined by my internal state, what I know how to do, how I'm feeling at the moment, what sounds like a good idea. What sounds like a good idea is mostly determined by what seems appropriate. And appropriate is pretty much defined by what other people of my social status do in this situation. And finally, it also includes what's handy, like what's in my environment, what's easy for me to do right now. Because whatever's near at hand, I'm going to eat. What am I going to eat right now? Chips. Because I have chips. I can reach the chips. If I had a salad right there, I would choose that instead. Unfortunately, they have to be in the fridge, and that makes it harder. But see, my environment influences my actions. And in turn, of course, my actions influence my environment. When we look at the effects of our actions, we often talk more about the external effects that our actions have on the world, the side effects. And in software, for instance, we may focus on the externally visible changes that we made in the code, which is important, totally important. But also, all of our actions leave us with the next version of ourselves at an individual level and at a team level and at a software team, which includes the code level. So if we have a big push to get this feature out according to some deadline, is it really a deadline? It's usually just a sad line. If it doesn't happen, someone will be sad. But when we do that push, what state have we left the code in? And what state have we left ourselves in? Are we tired and burnt out with a bunch of technical debt? I don't think that's a win for the software as a whole and for the future beyond right this second. So when I consider that my actions have these multiple effects, then I can use my actions right now to affect my future actions. Because of course there's a circle here. I affect my internal state and I affect my environment. In this code change, have I made future changes harder or easier? Have I clarified the language in the code or muddied it? What have I made easy for my future self? Because if I've muddied it up, I've just made further muddying a lot easier, and that's a cycle. Of course, our actions also affect our intentions. I can modify my own future intentions. In particular, I've noticed that one of the greatest powers that I have to determine how I will be in the future is where I put my attention, because that affects what I'm going to think is important. It affects how I feel internally. What we focus on is a direction that we grow. So consider whether you're growing in the direction of like joy and learning or of just getting more pissed at the world, because that doesn't really help. And further, when I want to change my future actions, I mean, yes, my intentions are one tool for that, but they're not my only tool. I can change my internal state. I can work on what I need and how I feel, and I can change my environment. I can make new things easy. This is especially true at work, in software in particular, because as developers, we have unprecedented control over our own work environment. We work on the computer and we change what the computer does. We're good at that. We can do it. So like, if I am really frustrated about screwing things up in Git, then one, I could change my internal state by spending a few hours paying attention to some videos and blog posts about how Git works internally. And I could, build up my mental model of how it works and then relate to it better. But I can also change my environment. I can set up aliases or PowerShell functions or whatever works for where I am to do some of these Git operations for me in the way that is correct. So for instance, after the first few times I accidentally pushed to the main branch on an open source repository when I didn't mean to, I can fix that. Since I spent that time learning about Git, I know about Git hooks, and I can make a hook to make sure that I don't push to main unless I really meant to. I can change my environment to help me make good decisions about when to push to main. And of course, if we can change our environment, we're naturally changing other people's environments. So this also works on our teammates. When we set up continuous integration, we make it harder for us to break production. We make it harder for everyone to break production. And we make it easy for everyone to see the consequences of what they do and take action on that. We make it easy for people to act responsibility. Observability also has we make it easy for people to ask responsibly. Observability also helps with this. But everything we do, of course, affects the internal state of the people close to us, especially the ones who care about us. It affects the environment of other people, and we can change their actions by making different things easy. And we can't help but affect what other people think other people do because we are the other people and we are doing it. We set norms every time we act, or we move them a little bit. So if I wear a dress on stage, it makes it just a little bit more normal for the people on stage to wear a dress, and they're still not going to get the microphones to work with dresses, but what do you do? We always shift the norms with our actions just a little, and that helps. So we have some power over others, but we also have a lot of power over ourselves in this. For instance, when there's something I want to be doing, but I really don't feel up to it, like I want to be writing a talk, or I want to be coding, and I'm just like, can I play video games? What I do then is I don't will myself into coding or whatever it is, because this is creative work. I can't do it if I'm not in a creative space. Certainly can't do it well. Instead, I ask myself, what will get me into a state where I can do this? And based on historical evidence, not what I feel like, yes, I would love to stay in bed and read Twitter, but an hour from now, I will not be happy that I did that. That will not have put me into the state I want to be in. Instead, I've learned over time that if I get up and I have coffee and I do my tiny yoga and I go outside and greet the day, that will get me into a state where I'm more likely to be able to code. So it takes historical evidence. I just have to think about, okay, what in the past has gotten me into a state where I can exercise? And I mean, a lot of that is habit. Habit is one of the major forces shaping what we're likely to actually do. So sometimes we can use our willpower to build up a habit, and then it gets easier and easier over time. That's crucial because our willpower might help us right now, but it doesn't scale past right now. What scales is practice, is choosing what we regularly do in order to become the future version of ourselves that we want. For instance, at a team level, maybe our intention is to deliver high quality software, but every release they find bugs and there's downtime and we have to scramble to get the software up again. And we just really want to deliver high quality software. Can we stop releasing bugs? Can we just be better at this? And if we were better, we could deliver more frequently. But you can't will that. I mean, you kind of feel like you can because this one time you had a smooth release. Maybe 1 out of 5 releases go smoothly and you're like, we just need to try harder and they can all be like that. No, you got lucky. Sometimes you get lucky. But when you put a bunch of changes into production, the chances of them interacting or one of them having a problem shoots up drastically. And you get lucky less and less frequently. And it's not about you. We can fix this. For instance, try delivering more frequently. And first it's like, no, we can't deliver frequently until we can deliver high quality. You got the order wrong. You're going to deliver high quality because you started delivering frequently. Delivering frequently means you have to make the changes smaller. And smaller changes are inherently more reliable to deliver because you have a much better chance of getting lucky with one change than with 5 or 20. And when it goes badly, you know exactly what changed and you can diagnose it and get it back up quickly with a lot less panic and way fewer people brought into the war room. And that gives you more comfort in delivering frequently. And this is a virtuous cycle, which results in high quality software. How do I know it results in high quality software? Because I started reading the book Accelerate. I recommend this. This is like, there's industry research for this. So if we exercise our intention to choose a practice and then follow that practice for a while, we can realize the oblique goal that we wanted to hit, because our deliveries will get more reliable. And then in this case, if we also want our product to increase in quality at a faster rate, add another practice of checking the results after delivery. So as a developer, if I can like see what happened in production and see whether the feature that I just delivered is working well, I can get better at predicting what's going to work well. And I can have more knowledge in my internal state and make better decisions. The trick is, don't wait until you're in the state that you want to be in order to act like you're there, in order to do the practices that will keep you there. We also have to do those practices in order to get there. So you don't have to be in order to move. We move in order to be. The change is first. The change is essential. And we build anything that appears static out of constant change and constant improvement. Change our practices to change ourselves. There are other ways that we can live in a closer to event-sourced manner when we recognize change as essential. For instance, some of our decisions, we can choose to document why we did it. Now, Pixie won't do this. I can't get this out of my cat, but I can do it with my team. Architecture decision records are an example of this. Or maybe anytime we change our process, like when we start daily stand-ups, we might write down why we started daily stand-ups and what we expected to see and what problems we were trying to solve with that or change. And then, a couple weeks or a month later, we could come back and look at it. It's what you're supposed to do in your retros and be like, well, did that have the effect we wanted? Did it have some other effect that we like? Maybe keep doing it, maybe don't, maybe keep doing it, but for different reasons. We can, because we realize how important change is, we can do it consciously, and we can revisit it consciously, and we can document some of the changes carefully. And it's important to continually move. But in order to constantly move, sometimes you got to realize that it's not always about going forward toward any particular set goal. We have cycles in our cultures for reasons. I mean, there's like annual traditions, and then we have our weekly sprints or whatever, where we check back in. And this is a movement that lets us continually learn and grow without having to be exclusively goal-oriented. Not that goals are bad, but they are not sufficient. I want to move overall toward a direction, not to a destination. There is no rewrite architecture of perfection at which point your software will be great and correct. That's not a thing. And also, you'll probably never get there from here. We want our software to be continually better, continually, and by better, I mean continually more appropriate to the context. Now, that context is always changing, of course. People's expectations and what we need from it are always changing. So there is no end state. I mean, the only done in software is out of production. And software, like us, is alive through continual renewal and improvement. If nothing else, please keep upgrading your libraries. That's the number one thing you can do for secure software. But again, secure is a good example. There is no secure state. There is only less secure states that you continue moving out of. The security and privacy, these are directions. They are North Stars. They are quests that we keep moving toward, not a particular destination. Now, we do set destinations like within sight. We set near-term goals. For instance, deliver this feature. That is something that I do as part of my job, but it is not my job. If I'm on a product team, not a feature factory that just gets paid by contract, I'm on a team and I care about the company. I don't deliver features. I mean, I do, but it's not my job. My job and my team's job is to own capabilities. Success is operating useful software in production that helps our customers or other people in the business internally, or other software in the business, that counts, helps them do things they couldn't do without my software or couldn't do as smoothly. We own capabilities, and we need to keep those capabilities reliable and also getting better, meeting new expectations all the time. Oh, a good example of owning capabilities and also aiming for a direction is service level objectives. These are like where you're like, maybe you have some internal users of your software and you're like, how reliable do you need it to be? And they're like, oh, reliable. And you're like, do you have any idea how expensive that is? And they're like, okay, well, it's a reasonable expectation that this software would be responding to requests within a second, 99% of the time. Or if this is a customer-facing website, respond within 200 milliseconds, 99.9% of the time, according to what's reasonable for the circumstances. And now you have a direction. You want to add more capabilities or improve the capabilities within the boundaries of that reliability. And then when you have outages and it dips below that level of reliabilities, you know it's time to work on changing to be more reliable before you go back to changing to have more richer capabilities or whatever people want. And this is part of owning the software as a whole, not just the code. So yes, sometimes we get to deliver a feature, and that's fun because it has an end goal. I merged the PR, I can go home. Yes, you can go home, but also check back in tomorrow after someone's deployed it and see whether that worked, and turn on the feature flag and see whether people start using it and whether it's working in the way that you expected. And all of that feeds back into what shall we do next? We need this feedback loop. This supports healthy change. Otherwise, we're just changing willy-nilly. And do we really know where we're going? And are we really getting where we intended? We need to come back and tell the story. Because if we don't do that, we're just updating in place and we don't really know why. So we can get really good at delivering features. We can be really good at a particular language, or a particular architecture. But be careful, because when we identify as someone who is an expert in Java or someone who is an expert in event sourcing, then we might be tempted to hold still. And we might, in fact, be tempted to hold that technology still so that we continue to be the expert with what we already know. But it's all about change. Event sourcing continues to change. This conference is part of that. We collectively in our conversations are advancing the state of the art in event sourcing. We're making it better and different, and this is good. And we individually at this conference are growing and changing in our learning, and especially in our conversations, and especially in who we meet. Abeba Barhani puts it, a person is a person through other persons. If you really want to change yourself or get into a different state, change who you're with. Change who you talk to on a regular basis. Or if I really need to write a talk and I'm not there, sometimes I need a conversation with the right person to get me going. So we are constantly changing. When we realize that the change is who we are, not any properties we currently have, then we can exercise this consciously. We can practice change. We can change our practices regularly. We can try new things, be uncomfortable, and be comfortable with being uncomfortable, because that's how we change. Just like event sourcing, we can put change first in our own lives, do it consciously, and grow in directions of our choosing.